Hey creatives, I'm your host, Aylin Wild, and this is my podcast, Empathy Machine. Thank you so much for tuning in. If this is your first time, welcome. In this podcast, I discuss films, give you videography tips and tricks, and unpack other creative topics. In this episode, I'll be discussing the recently released Netflix film, All the Bright Places, directed by Brett Haley and starring Elle Fanning, who also produced the film, and Justice Smith. The film is based on the novel of the same name, written by Jennifer Niven, who also co-wrote the screenplay. When I first saw the trailer for this film, I must admit I wrote it off pretty much immediately as a teenage drama, which incidentally it is, but there are some underlying issues in this film that run much deeper than this and are actually hugely important to talk about and understand. So in today's episode, I'll be unpacking the film a little bit and running through the narrative, discussing the main themes it brings up, and finally briefly discussing some other resources that relate to these main themes. First of all, let's just go through the major film narrative. Set in Indiana during the final year of high school, we meet two students, Violet Markey and Theodore Finch, known to his friends as simply Finch. The manner in which we meet them is pretty dark. Violet is standing on the edge of a very high bridge with her eyes closed. Finch is taking one of his regular neighborhood runs and spots her contemplating whether or not to take the plunge. He handles the situation well, albeit in a rather unorthodox manner, by jumping up beside her on the ledge rather than trying to coax her down in an attempt to show solidarity and lighten the mood. We learn through the course of the film that the reason she was on the ledge is that particular day marked the 1-year anniversary of her sister Eleanor's death, who died in a car crash which Violet survived on the very same bridge. We also learn that Finch has some problems of his own. It is revealed through the high school counselor, whom he has weekly sessions with, that he is on probation and in danger of not graduating due to skipping school so regularly. Finch quickly develops feelings for Violet, despite her frequent attempts to push him away. Violet also has a boyfriend, Roma, although it's clear from the start that he is pretty insensitive towards her fragile state. For example, in asking her to attend a party with him, he says it wouldn't kill you to have some fun. At the party itself, noticing that she's not having fun, he asks, "How much longer are you going to act like this? It's been months." As we begin to learn more about Finch, we see his older sister, who appears to be more of a guardian than a sibling, looking after him while their mother is on one of her frequent business trips. Finch's father is hardly mentioned at this point, but it's obvious that he's out of the picture. Finch's bedroom, we see, is plastered with different colored post-it notes covering the walls. Close-up shots of these notes reveal short phrases, mostly one word, such as run, morning, relax, Monday, life, trust, promise, maybe, symphony, avoid quicksand, dark evening, let us free, and I'd lie for you. The phrases stay awake, I am awake, and multiple other variations of the phrase are notably present more than once. Back at Violet's house, we see her well-intentioned parents encouraging her to move forward with her new life without her sister. Violet's mother brings out a birthday cake for Eleanor's birthday anniversary, saying, "I've been making it for 19 years. However, Violet promptly leaves the room. Back in school, Violet and Finch's shared geography class gives them an assignment entitled Wander Indiana, designed to help students appreciate the sights of Indiana before heading off to college. The assignment requires a report on 2 or more wonders of Indiana, which they must complete in teams of 2. Violet attempts to excuse herself from the assignment by asking her mother to phone the school. She agrees on the condition Violet spend more time with her friends because it's time to get back out there. Meanwhile, we see slightly disturbing footage of Finch apparently attempting to hold his breath in a bathtub for as long as possible. The relationship between Finch and Violet starts to shift as they bond over their mutual exclusion from society. We learn that his nickname in school is, imaginatively, the Freak, which he explains is due to people's need for labels and a dislike of anything they see as not fitting into their idea of normal. She agrees, people don't like messy. He then tells her through a quote from his favorite author that she has 1,000 capacities within her. Unable to receive an exemption for the geography assignment, Violet agrees to do the project with Finch as long as she doesn't have to get into a car. Finch takes Violet to Indiana's highest point, which turns out to be just a rock in the middle of the woods. Jumping enthusiastically on top of the rock, however, he says excitedly, "Get on up here, Ultraviolet, the view is incredible," to which she grudgingly joins him, remarking, "This is the lamest thing I've ever seen." The next stop is an abandoned building, inside which is a piece of wall art which reads, "Before I die." Beneath this is space for people to write with chalk what they would like to do before they die, to which he writes, "Stay awake," and she writes, "Be brave." Back at school, Violet's friend Amanda tells her to be careful of Finch as he's dangerous, having thrown a chair at her boyfriend Roma the year before. Finch's counselor meanwhile urges him to attend a support group to discuss his issues in a group setting. Finch manages to convince Violet to get into a car with him to see the best wonder, and they drive to a homemade roller coaster which appears to be built in the backyard of an old couple. Their relationship finally moves into more romantic territory, and we see a soft montage sequence of the first rosy stages of their relationship. We also see them visiting a fourth wonder, a shoe tree. Both look happy and blissful, the music is very soft and orchestral, the light is dappled and faded, and all looks well. However, the montage sequence ends with Finch looking distractedly into the distance as they sit, now a couple, in a cafe booth with his friends. We then see his empty chair in the classroom and Violet texting him, "Where are you?" An over-the-shoulder shot reveals that Finch is sitting in near darkness by a lakeside somewhere. After 2 days of no contact, Violet questions Finch's friends about his behavior, to which they respond, "This is just what Finch does, and that's just something you have to deal with if you want to be close with him." Finally, Finch returns, apparently totally oblivious to her concerns. Brushing off her questions, he distracts her with an array of violet flowers in the back of his truck. He then takes her to the bottomless lake, which he says, legend has it, is a portal to another world. Taking his shirt off to swim in the lake, a large scar on his torso is revealed. Continually dodging her questions, he refuses to tell her anything personal about him. However, when she insists, he finally tells her that his father gave him the scar whilst in one of his dark moods, and that sometimes he needs to go places to feel more like himself, to be reminded that he is still in control. The couple spend the night on an abandoned train and return in the morning to her furious and worried parents. Thus begins the spiraling breakdown of Finch, who proceeds to rip the post-it notes off his wall and sleep in his cupboard. Back at school, a fight breaks out between Roma and Finch upon Roma calling him a freak and claiming that Violet is merely dating him in order to fix him. Finch finally goes to the support group, where it's revealed that Violet's friend Amanda also suffers from suicidal thoughts, having tried to end her life twice, and that she is bulimic. Battling his conflicting moods, Finch seeks answers from his sister. He questions her about their father and whether she thought he could ever get better, but she refuses to discuss the topic with him. Violet confronts Finch in his bedroom and asks about the post-it notes. He tells her it's his way of trying to focus on staying awake and that sometimes he goes blank. He says he gets into a dark mood and thinks too fast to be able to keep track of anything, and that his thoughts then disappear all at once. Post-it notes are a way of helping him focus and slow down, but it doesn't always work. Feeling compassion for him, Violet attempts to reach out to him. Finch tells her she doesn't understand and asks her to leave. He then disappears for the final time and Violet finds his clothes at the lake edge. We then see Finch's funeral and Amanda opens up to Violet about her suicide attempts. Violet takes a drive to visit the final place on Finch's map of Indiana Wonders. The map leads her to a church building with an inscription on the wall, describing it as the Traveler's Prayer Chapel, built in memoriam to those who have lost their lives in car accidents. Addressing the class at the geography presentation, Violet gives a moral of the story speech about the important things in life. She says that Finch, amidst his own pain, taught her to wander, to appreciate the small things, and to find beauty in the ugliest of places. The final credits of the film show a dedication. This film is dedicated to those who have been impacted by mental health concerns, suicide, or grief. If you're struggling or know someone who is, you can find more resources at allthebrightplacesfilm.info. I've seen this film twice now, and both times left me a little cold. I'm not really a big fan of teen romances, and I just didn't buy this relationship, unfortunately. The whole film, I was hyper aware that I was watching a film and that the characters were actors, and I just didn't think there was any chemistry between the two. The script was annoyingly vague and cheesy to the point of being quite irritating. I also thought the style was very strange because everything is filmed almost through this veil of faded light and whimsy, which doesn't really fit the issues addressed in the narrative at all. I haven't read the book that the film is based on, but by the sounds of it, it's quite a bit darker than the film. Finch's character is apparently quite obsessed with death and keeps detailed notes about how to end his life. It also mentions that Finch has undiagnosed bipolar disorder, which is the same mental disorder that his father struggles with. I'm actually quite disappointed in this film because I think this could have been such a powerful story. I love the idea of two people healing each other and the tragedy of how one of them succeeds and the other fails. I just think it could have been such a tearjerker and thought-provoker, but it just left me feeling kind of nothing at all. I didn't even cry, and I always cry. I do think, though, that the topics addressed in this film are extremely important and need to be brought to people's attention more often. In America, suicide is the second leading cause of death for young people aged between 10 and 24. It's also the second leading cause of death for college-age students and ages 12 to 18. It kills more young people than cancer, heart disease, AIDS, birth defects, stroke, pneumonia, influenza, and chronic lung disease combined. In the UK, the story is similar, with suicide being a leading cause of death among young people. This film was made in conjunction with a network of mental health professionals who were consulted closely throughout the production to ensure that nothing in the film would trigger any kind of copycat responses. This was especially important given the reaction to the controversial Netflix TV series 13 Reasons Why, which depicted the central character ending her life in graphic detail. The scene was eventually deleted from the show, but not after an onslaught of copycat suicides, which increased 29% in the first month after the show's premiere. As you can imagine, Netflix was under extreme pressure to handle this topic with extreme care, hence the vague nature of this film. If this film is about mental illness in young people, I don't think it's the best film I've ever seen dealing with this issue. If this is a film about teen romance, again, I don't think it's the best film I've ever seen dealing with that issue either. What would have made it a better film, in my opinion, would have been much more of a focus on one or the other. I was never sure what it was trying to be, and as a result, it wasn't really anything for me. However, like I said, I did really like the underlying narrative. It reminded me somewhat of an Amazon Prime film I watched recently called Beautiful Boy, starring Steve Carell and Timothée Chalamet. Now, that is a great film. Definitely give that a watch if you really want a moving story about love and addiction. Beautiful Boy is a far superior example, in my view, of a film that deals with two topics so beautifully and delicately that it allows both to be heard and truly absorbed. In comparison, All the Bright Places definitely fell short in my eyes. Taking the narrative at face value, though, it definitely got me thinking about the fates of the two characters. Violet begins the story depressed and on the verge of ending her life. Finch, despite battling his own demons, leads her through a process of healing. He encourages her, sometimes quite firmly, to open up about her sister's death and to move on with her life. He manages to get her into a car again and makes the experience as enjoyable as possible. He gets her to start writing again and taking up the things that used to bring her joy. We see Violet begin the healing process, which her parents failed to initiate in her. Finch, on the other hand, receives very little support. He is forced to speak up about his issues to his school counselor, but fails to connect with him. He tries going to a support group, but again, this fails to connect with his pain and frustration. His mother is absent and his father is abusive. He has very few friends in school because he has driven them all away through his aggressive mood swings. And the only person left is his sister, who also fails to connect with his pain. Violet is the only person who may be able to reach him, but she also fails. Rather than persisting, Violet becomes upset and gives up on him. This is what eventually leads to his death when he has nowhere left to turn. Again, I was very struck with the similarity between this story and the one in Beautiful Boy. Beautiful Boy is the true story of Nick, a teenage boy battling with various kinds of heavy drug addiction, spanning over years of his life. Nick's father is the only one who never gives up on him, even when everyone else does. In an interview with The Real Father and Son that I watched after seeing that film, Nick's father stresses the importance of being persistent and never giving up on someone battling addiction of any kind. He said that he received so much advice from other parents to just let his son go off for a while on his own and figure himself out, but he stressed that this was the worst advice you could ever give. He said that the most important thing is to never give up, and now he spends his life teaching parents the importance of this. The difference in All the Bright Places between the two characters is that Violet gives up, but Finch never does. Despite being knocked back multiple times and told not to keep pushing her to move on, he refused to listen. And I think if nothing else, that's probably the biggest thing I got out of this film, especially after watching Beautiful Boy. Because in Beautiful Boy, the son does end up getting through his addiction and moving on to a happy and thriving life. In All the Bright Places, although it is a fictional story, I know, Finch doesn't make it through because everyone in his life loses patience. That's definitely an encouragement to me, and I hope to you as well, to never give up on people. There are so many young people in our world today who are in so much pain that they would rather end their lives than face it alone. And that's the thing, they really do believe they're alone. All the enemy has to do to win the battle for our lives is to separate us out and convince us we're alone, that no one understands us, that no one cares about us, and that no one believes in us. If you're feeling alone today, please hear me. You are not alone. God sees you. He loves you. He loves you more than you could ever possibly imagine. And he has such an incredible plan for your life if you will just invite him in and allow him into your heart. Even if you don't believe he exists today, I just want to challenge you. Why not ask him into your heart? Why not call out to him? What's the worst that could happen? Nothing. Seriously, the worst that could happen is nothing. But the best thing that could happen is that you enter into a relationship with your adoring Father in heaven who longs for a relationship with you. Why not give him a chance? I also would like to take this opportunity to point out to you some other resources that might be helpful if you do relate to any of the issues addressed in this film. If you're in the US, visit Mental Health America, that's mhnational.org. If you're in the UK, visit mind.org.uk, and if you're in Australia, visit sane.org or beyondblue.org.au. If you just need someone to talk to, not in a professional sphere, obviously, but maybe you're just feeling lonely, you can also email me at ailenwildmedia@gmail.com, and I'd love to chat with you about anything you'd like some support in. I know a lot of young people in our culture today struggle with mental health issues, and I myself have struggled with it. For years, I had depression and social anxiety, which is very common among young people of the age I was. Most of my friends had varying degrees of depression. I would cry pretty much every week, and when I say cry, I mean like actual sobbing, like something really traumatic had happened. I remember I used to call it the rock because it felt like I had this huge immovable rock on my chest. It was quite bizarre, really, because at one point I genuinely couldn't remember what it was like not to feel that way. Looking back now from a much brighter place, I can see just how depressed I was. At the time, I didn't really think too much about it, really. I just thought that's what growing up was like. I would say I still have social anxiety, but it was even worse a few years ago. I really struggle in group settings, especially parties, but even just a casual group of people I know. I kind of just stop talking and freeze up, and I find it really hard to just be normal. Sometimes I have panic attacks just before or after a social gathering, although I haven't had one in months now. I don't really know why I do that, but I'm really just trying to change it, and I definitely think I'm improving. I also experienced something quite dark for about a year of my life, which I never really speak about. I have spoken about it once before, but it's not really something I broadcast. However, if it can help anyone to get help or to know they're not alone, I think it's worth me sharing it on here. I was never diagnosed with anything because I never went to a psychologist or anything, but looking at the definitions, if I had to self-diagnose, which I know is problematic, but I would say I probably had some kind of delusional paranoid disorder. According to Better Health Channel, delusional paranoid disorder is characterized by the dominance of one delusion or false belief without any other sign of mental illness. The person's behavior depends on which delusion they have. For example, a person who has delusion of persecution believes that other people are spying on them or plotting to harm them in some way. Stalking can be the result of delusional paranoid disorder. For example, the person believes they are in a relationship with a movie star they have never met. In another case, a person may imagine they have a terrible illness despite repeated reassurance from doctors. So I had the first example, which is the delusion of persecution, believing that other people were watching me and plotting to harm me. I honestly can't really describe the feeling. I don't think you can really understand it unless you've experienced it, but I'll try my best to explain. Basically, I would wake up every morning with this fear, and the fear would either build or somewhat dissipate depending on the situation. If I was alone in any way, it was quite strong. The more people were around me, the less strong it was, but it was still there. Any place I had to walk from one place to another, I would become convinced that every man that walked past me and every car that drove past me was plotting to kill me. I genuinely believed someone was going to rape and stab me to death. I just didn't know who or when. I would research self-defense techniques at home so I would know what to do when it happened. For some reason, I was quite terrified of the cinema, I think probably because of the news stories of shootings in American cinemas. Every time someone left the cinema, I would become convinced they were going to get their friends so they could all come in and kill everyone. Watching the news in any way was hugely traumatic for me as well because my mind was already so vulnerable, and the news is generally not the best thing to watch if you're feeling unsafe. Anytime I got in a bus and I was the only passenger, I would get really panicked because I thought the bus driver would drive me off to some random field and kill me there. Taxis were also completely terrifying. At home, I would meticulously lock all the doors and windows whenever I was home. I asked my mum to get a pole for the sliding door because I had read that people could break in quite easily through sliding doors. I removed all the bricks from around the house so they couldn't be thrown at the windows or doors to smash them. I asked my mum to buy a bougainvillea plant to go under the fence so it would grow up and hopefully deter anyone from climbing over. Nighttime was definitely the worst because I thought it was more likely they would come then when everyone was asleep. I had this ritual before I went to bed that I would keep getting up to check outside my window and watch the driveway, and I would just keep doing that every 5 minutes until I fell asleep. That period of trying to fall asleep was really horrible. I had this really intense fear that just wouldn't leave me. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed and crying and rocking back and forth reciting the Psalms. Eventually, one night, I remember I had this really weird experience of becoming paralyzed. I was kind of half sitting up and I was crying, and suddenly I literally just couldn't move. I could kind of breathe, but not really. I just remember saying, "Help me," over and over again. And it was amazing. This incredible peace just washed over my entire body and the fear left me. I just lay down and said thank you and closed my eyes and went to sleep. And still to this day, that fear hasn't returned. And that was quite a few years ago now. I'm not sure why God let me go through that experience for so long before He released me, but I have a feeling He's planning on using it in some way to help other people. I also feel like that time was so horrible that it kind of pushed me closer to Him, where I really just had to rely on Him at all times to keep me safe. I honestly don't think I'd be as close with Him if I hadn't gone through that experience. I do still occasionally have some residual paranoia, which can be triggered by certain films. For example, the other night I watched a film about a woman with psychotic depression, which kind of triggered me a little bit. I didn't sleep very well that night, but I'm actually grateful because it reminded me how horrible that experience was for me, and it made me feel so blessed to be okay now. So I would say that, if you're in that situation right now, there is hope. Ask God to help you, go see a therapist, but there is hope for you. If you'd like to educate yourself more about mental health, there are some other films that deal with this issue that I'd like to quickly mention as well. On Netflix, we of course have the TV show that I mentioned, 13 Reasons Why. Now, if you are struggling with mental health problems, I would not recommend you watch this because, as I said, it could potentially be triggering. However, I do think it does provide some insight into the mind of someone going through depression and the situations that might trigger the thoughts of suicide. Also on Netflix is the recently released Netflix film Horse Girl, starring Alison Brie. I just watched this film the other night. That was the one I was talking about, and I actually really liked it. The film depicts the downward spiral of a woman called Sarah who is suffering from psychotic depression, a genetic disorder inherited from her grandmother, which was passed down to her mother and finally to her. I didn't know anything about psychotic depression, but it's basically depression that's so severe that it gives way to hallucinations and delusions. We learn in the film that Sarah's mother committed suicide when she was young, that her best friend fell off a horse when she was younger as well and became severely mentally disabled, and that her stepfather is extremely distant. Basically, she has no one in her life to turn to and so is forced to invent a new reality in which she believes she is actually her grandmother who has been abducted by aliens and dropped into another place in time. The film does such a good job of putting you in her shoes so that you almost don't quite know which reality is the real one. The final scene of the film sees her being beamed up into the sky by aliens, and you're left unsure whether it was all true or whether this was just her way of ending her life. I really loved this blurring of reality because it does really help you to empathize with someone in that position and allows you to start thinking about the world from the perspective of someone living in that kind of terrifying reality. Like I said, it did trigger something in me, but if you haven't gone through psychotic depression or any kind of paranoia, then definitely check that one out. Another Netflix film about mental illness in the form of an eating disorder is To the Bone, starring Lily Collins. Again, this film has also received criticism for its depiction of anorexia nervosa, particularly because Collins had to lose so much weight for the role. The fact that she already struggled with an eating disorder is really quite alarming and honestly, I believe quite morally unacceptable. However, the film is apparently based on the writer-director's own history with anorexia, so one hopes there is some kind of insight into that if nothing else. Just a disclaimer, I haven't actually seen it, so I can't give much feedback, but if you want to understand the thought processes behind an eating disorder like anorexia, which is definitely linked to mental health issues, I would maybe give that a watch as well. Finally, on Netflix, we have the classic 2000 film Girl Interrupted, starring Winona Ryder and Angelina Jolie. This offers a slightly different take in that this film is about the psychiatric system and how perfectly sane people can find themselves there. The film is based on the memoir of a woman who found herself trapped for 2 years in the system because, according to her, once you're in, everyone just assumes you're insane. Now, it's been quite a few years since I've seen this film, but again, I do think there is some insight to be had from seeing a film based on someone's actual experiences of reality. and also for Ryder and Jolie, who are really great in their roles. Over on Amazon Prime, we have some really great films. This Beautiful Fantastic is a lovely film about a woman with obsessive compulsive disorder. It's a completely fantastical take on the disorder and not really meant to be realistic in any way, but I just think it's a lovely little film and worth a watch on a rainy Sunday afternoon. The Road Within is another one starring Robert Sheehan as a character with Tourette's syndrome, Zoe Kravitz, who has anorexia nervosa, and Dev Patel with obsessive compulsive disorder. It's not a fantastic film, but it did make me laugh and cry, and I actually found it quite moving and really sweet at times. Again, I'm not sure exactly how realistic the depictions are of these disorders, but I thought it was a lovely story all the same. Silver Linings Playbook, starring Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence, is a fantastic film, also available on Amazon Prime. The story follows a man named Pat who suffers with bipolar disorder, attempting to get his life back on track after being released from a mental health clinic. He meets a woman named Tiffany who also suffers from some kind of mental disorder, and the two of them practice for a dance competition together. It's great, you should watch it, enough said. We then have A Beautiful Mind, starring Russell Crowe, which is honestly one of my favorite films of all time. It's the true story of a genius mathematician named John Nash, who develops paranoid schizophrenia. He believes that the Pentagon has enlisted him to help them crack Soviet encryptions, and that he's been given an important mission to carry out. It's such a heartbreaking story, but it really does help you get inside the head of someone experiencing this illness and how real it can appear to them. Finally, on Amazon Prime, we have The Aviator, another true story depicting the life of Howard Hughes, played fantastically by Leonardo DiCaprio. Although the film is about his exploits as a film director and pilot, the depictions of his extreme obsessive-compulsive disorder are absolutely astonishing. DiCaprio is so fantastic in this role, and I certainly have never seen a more convincing depiction of a man so affected by this disorder, so it's definitely worth a watch in my opinion. My 10 film picks for this week come from Netflix UK, and the category is Films to Better Understand Racism. In alphabetical order, the films are 12 Years a Slave, 13th, Barry, Becoming, Fruitvale Station, Kalushi, The Story of Solomon Malangu, LA 92, Mudbound, Oprah Winfrey Presents When They See Us Now, and The African Doctor. Head on over to alienwildmedia.com/filmlists and let me know which of these resonated with you the most and why, and which film that's not on there that you think people should check out as well. Okay, that's it for today's episode on All the Bright Places. Thank you so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed it. If this episode inspired you at all, please don't forget to leave me a review. That would be really helpful. And I'd love to hear your feedback and any requests you might have for future episodes. Also, check out the show notes for this episode at alienwildmedia.com/podcasts. I hope you have a great week and tune in next time for more creative insight into my experiences in the world of video and film.